Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Contact Lost. You haven't heard from us for a while, but I guess we had to recover from the LGT. And if you haven't seen the stuff we've done, I'm sure you'll be able to see it either on the London Grand Tournament page or on our channel shortly after we get ourselves together and upload it. Nevertheless, today's episode is about the latest GT we had in Poland and about the Chaos Daemons Codex. And with me, I have a first-time guest, and I would like to welcome Lesiu.
Yeah, hello everyone.
Hi, mate. Great to have you on. Lesiu is another Polish national team regular, but I think it'll be better if he tells you guys all about how he's been faring in the national team, etc., etc. So, Lesiu, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. And so I've been to WTC this year, and it wasn't my first one. Actually, it was fifth one, I believe, if we include ETC. So yeah, four times with national team and once with mercenary team. And I actually was I took second. We took second place twice and third place once. Well, I believe pretty decent, but still missing the first place. Again, missed it this year.
Well, congrats on those achievements, and hopefully you guys finally manage to get that first place next year. What about our Polish league this year? How have you been managing it?
Well, I have attended quite a lot of tournaments actually this year. So I believe I've been second in Warsaw at the beginning of the year. Then in Krakow, not so well. I didn't do so well, but Harlequins back then got all
Yes,
all the
9 point
scores.
winners.
Yeah, that was quite oppressive list. Then again in Katowice in like this paired tournament, I was third, and then in Kozłów we were first, I believe. And well, now I've been to Poznań, or actually Międzyrzecz. I don't know if anyone can pronounce it or understand it even. So we won it. So yeah, I guess pretty well.
So you're on a good streak, 2 wins in a row.
Yeah, but I missed. Unfortunately, I missed Heresy, and I really wanted to be there, but you picked really wrong date because my first son he had his first birthday on Saturday of
Oh,
this event. So I basically didn't have any choice there, and I missed it.
I'll do it a week later next year, so you
Yeah,
can come.
I hope so because I actually used to go to Heresy well back in the day. I believe I played on during fifth edition, and it was a lot of fun always.
Yeah, all right. Well, hopefully we can make it work next year. But speaking of the last tournament, so the aptly named Pera Cup, which loosely translates to Potato Cup, what was that tournament? It was a 3v3 team event. However, it was a little bit different than your usual team tournaments. Would you care to explain what the differences were?
Yeah, well, it was the pairing process was quite unusual because, well, first of all, there were three different tables in each for each match, and they have not only different terrain density, but as well they have had different mission and different deployment. So, mm, so you actually had to take that into account when planning for the games and when pairing the players. And when you were creating the pairings, you actually didn't pair armies with each other, but you actually assigned each army to the table and the mission, and you did it without like in secret. So the other team didn't know which army was assigned to which table. So, and well, then at the same time, we revealed our assignments, let's say, let's call them that. So, well, on the one hand, the pairings were a little bit more random because you could, pair knights into Tau without knowing this. But on the other hand, if you took into consideration the deployments, the scenarios, you could actually play around it and, well, first of all, assign proper mission to your army, and second of all, guess what the other team will do with their armies. So, for example, usually Tau would take a table that has not much terrain on it and probably has some kind of longer deployment zones, so something like that.
Yeah, and also the mission mattered as well, because what I found out is, for example, that if you had a round where you had the mission where you move objectives, sisters really liked that mission and would usually take that table. So it was interesting to have that like a different layer. I personally like that pairing system, but I don't think I'd want to play this much more often than once a year. What about you?
Yeah, it was. First of all, it was very refreshing because on normal 3 versus 3 tournament, you usually just pick one army that has really bad pairing, and you just try use it to avoid it. You use the pairing process to avoid this certain matchup. And here it was actually a little bit more. You had a little bit more freedom in the pairings, so it came out a little bit differently. And like you mentioned, it gave like another layer of preparation and another layer into the pairing process.
So, what about your team? What armies did you take, and was there any particular ideas behind it?
Well, so we actually formed our team in Belgium. So one of the evenings, just I think Duda said that, well, he doesn't have a team, and we said that, yeah, me and Gyto said that we don't have it either. So yeah, let's make a team. So that's how we formed our team, and the armies kind of followed with the players. So Gyto was obviously on Necrons. Duda, after playing so much knights into WTC, is now playing mostly Eldars. So he also picked this. And for me, it was actually a decision because we thought about playing knights. But then again, we decided that there will be a lot of Tau. They will probably pick a terrain that they will pick a table that has not much terrain on it. So that's probably not good for knights. And if knights take a table that has a lot of terrain, then they are pretty, well, outmatched with, yeah, I'm screwed of movement and screwed against Harlequins or Eldars that will just move block them all the time. So we decided to take Chaos Daemons, and I actually had a lot of models and played them in previous editions. Well, actually, I even played them in this edition back in the early 9th. So actually, I took them to one of the tournaments in 2021. So yeah, I thought that it would be fun, and it turned out that the demons pair really well into both Tau and Harlequins, which there were plenty of on this tournament, and they can pick a table that has not much terrain on it as well. So that also played nicely into our composition, because Eldars basically need terrain. They need a lot of terrain because their units are very squishy. And Necrons needs at least some terrain to hide against heavy shooting. So yeah, it played out nicely. And we also took into consideration what you mentioned, that some scenarios are actually better for different armies because Necrons can play the vital ground, or whatever it's called now, the four objectives on the
Mission
diagonal.
13.
Yeah, Mission
Data's Cry
13.
Salvage, I think it's now called.
Yeah.
But yeah, 13. Let's
Yeah.
stick with that.
So Necrons played really well, and they can take all the down of war deployment as well, that we don't like. So yeah, so actually that worked out nicely with the composition. We also did some minor tweaks, like Duda took, because he had a custom craft word, so he took additional AP on the charge, because we expected some like Blood Angels or some Chaos Space Marines or stuff like that he might get on the densely packed table. And it actually worked out quite nicely, because he played some Necrons and I believe some Tau. So yeah, it was nice.
Okay, and what about your demon list? What did you take?
So the demons actually had quite a journey since the release of the codex, because outside of flamers, which are obviously very powerful, our community couldn't decide what units to take, and we had a running joke that every day we are spinning a wheel of fortune to see what's overpowered today and what's not, and it kept on spinning, well, for more than a month. And at the end of the day, we ended up with Lord of Change, which is, well, he is very durable with certain relic and traits, well, especially with -1 to wound and impossible rope, which lets him ignore one wound each phase, which is unusual because most of those mechanics work only once per turn. So it's really nice, and he can do a lot of mortal wounds. Well, it's somewhere between, like, I don't know, 8 and 12, depends on his targets, every turn. So, and he's really hard to kill, so he usually dishes out like 50 mortals during the game. So that's quite oppressive. So that's that. So Lord of Change, so 3 times Flamers. I actually had 3 times 5, because I find a 6-man squads a little bit harder to work with, because you need to consider coherency, unit coherency. And then I took Belacor, because, well, he is very durable. He adds nice utility to my army, because he has a Warp Locus and he has a teleport spell, Shrouded Step it's called. So he helps with you screw up your placement on the board, especially with flamers, or if they get locked up in combat. And then I had quite a lot of units to score the objectives. Like usual, some screamers, some bloodletters, some nerdlings. Well, one thing that was slightly unusual was 2 units of pink horrors. But since I knew that I will take tables that have little terrain and the objectives will be out in the open, I decided that horrors that can actually stand on those objectives and withstand a lot of shooting are quite a nice choice. And indeed they were. So, well, that was pretty much all I had.
So that was the sole reason for that second unit of pinks. Okay, and that was a choice that did surprise me a little bit. Okay, you've quite nicely explained what was the reasoning behind pretty much each and every unit. So let's jump into the games you've had. So round one, who did you play?
So round one, we were playing against Cravat and the Gatrot's team. And I actually played Tau, and the player was Cravat. And so it was a favorable matchup for me. And we took well, fairly open table, but with diagonal deployment zones. So it was still quite nice for me because I could place my large demons in somewhere in the middle and push with them towards his deployment zone. But actually, in the end, I ended up placing them more on the side. Well, it doesn't matter. It all came up to this that I pushed hard first turn, and the Cravat tried to push back with crisis suits and some commanders, and he actually misplaced those crisis suits a bit when doing the fire and fade. Well, I don't remember how it's called for Tau.
Mhm.
So I could shoot those 5-man crisis unit that was worth like, I don't know, like close to 500 points. I could shoot them with 2 flamer units and place some mortal wounds from Lord of Change on them. So I basically wiped them out turn 2. And from then on, it was an uphill battle for Tau. Well, he actually had some units in reserves, like 2 planes, 2 bombers, and one small crisis unit. But so he deployed them turn 2 and killed like half of my flamers and got Lord of Change to like 1 or 2 wounds with this shooting and some combat. But it didn't really matter that much because I already had control of most of the board and killed like quite a significant chunk of his army. So we ended up trading for next 2 turns, but I was very ahead in scoring because I was doing 12 points from primary. I was doing fine on my secondaries, and Cravat couldn't catch up with primary whatsoever. So it ended up something like 85 to 37 or 89 to 37, something like that. Well, barely, but 20 to nothing.
Okay, well, congrats on that game. I actually played Cravat in round 2, and I pushed too aggressively, and then that crisis unit, actually, he played them much better in the game with me, so they comfortably jumped out of a ruin and then retreated behind it, so I couldn't really do anything with them, and then Kauyon kicked in. Bad dice kicked in, and yeah, I only scored 7, so I was very annoyed by that. Because I think demons into Tau is a favorable matchup for the demons.
Yeah, it's very favorable matchup because well, Tau can can only shoot, and when you have 3-up invulnerable save across the board, pretty much across the board, it's really hard to kill whole units. However, you are very dependent on some armors, well, some invulnerable or demonic armor save rolls, because if you fail slightly above the average, then it might go south pretty quickly. But like you mentioned, well, Cravat probably learned a lot in our game because he told me that it was his first time playing demons, and he didn't have much knowledge what to do there. So I tried to explain everything, but definitely he didn't know that flamers can kill those crisis suits such easily.
Right, so thanks, but not thanks. And you obviously, as a team, also won that game, right? So just for the record, Gyto played against
Eldar.
Eldar, and assumingly he won that game.
Yeah,
And then Duda with his Eldar played into Tyranids.
Yeah, he played against Warrior Spam and he actually lost. Well, Gyto was rolling his invulnerable saves like crazy, and then Feel No Pains kicked in, and well, Duda was just throwing units at him, and because I've seen the end of the game, it didn't do anything. So yeah, and well, Eldars, if they don't kill, they die
die.
pretty quickly in return. So
All right. Round 2 in that case. Who did you pair into?
yeah, we played with our Silesian team. So actually, my friends, because I'm living in Silesia right now,
Mm-hmm.
and they had Harlequins, they had Sisters, and they had Necrons.
Quite a strong composition for 3-man team.
Well, I believe most teams had strong compositions because in 3-man teams you usually will pick like top 5, top 6 codexes in the meta.
So who did you end up playing?
Well, I ended up playing Stashik, who was playing Harlequins, and we are playing Hammer and Anvil mission, the one with 5 objectives in the middle.
Scouring, I think.
Yeah, probably.
21, maybe. No, I don't remember the number. So how did that game go?
Well, I played Harlequins once before
Mhm.
with similar list, and it went pretty well. So I decided to. Well, actually, first thing first, the deployment was pretty drawish, and the mission, the objectives were placed in such a way that you could easily control one of the objectives from behind the ruin, and the second one was pretty much hidden. Well, you could, with some flanking maneuver, see a unit behind the ruin that was scoring the second objective, but it required some serious movement and placing yourself in danger. And the middle objective was pretty much in the open. So and Harlequins took obviously their mission, the one when you need to sacrifice units and to get into the deployment zone. The deathly performance, something like that. And then they took some warp, their interrogation and some banners. So they were aiming for defense, more defensive play. And like I mentioned, the terrain and objectives were quite favorable for this. So and I didn't want to go into trading with Harlequins and risking my objectives against his OPSEC, pretty much all OPSEC army. So I decided to go aggressively. So his first time he went first. He just really deployed his army, like to push it slightly up the board, but pretty much just went for the 2 objectives on his side and did some missions. So I decided to just go all in. I pushed both my big guys, so Belacor and Lord of Change, on the middle of the board, and teleport 1 Flamers. So Lord of Change killed with mortals one of the player units that was doing the mission, and actually Flamers failed to kill 5 players. So it didn't went that well, but I just said, okay, I'm going in. What's your call? And he decided to check, and actually, he decided to call. I made a bet, and he decided to call, and then he then shot everything he had and charged the Belacor and Lord of Change, but mostly Belacor. But he managed to survive with 2 wounds left, and the Lord of Change got like 4 or 5 wounds of him. So pretty much just a scratch. And well, pretty much whole of his army was out in the open in the middle. So I just pushed all of my flamers and bloodletters that were in deep strike and everything I had to just clear him. And well, flamers are really good at killing skyweavers and whatever the boats are called, and players as well. So I killed like 4 boats and 3 troop units, and actually I also killed a troop master with a charge from Lord of Change. He managed to do 3 wounds, and he failed to save with reroll. So yeah, so I killed like half of his army right there. So it was pretty much over. He just played his next turn, scored like 2 or 3 more points, and we decided to wrap it up because I would probably table him just there.
Okay, but
so it ended up 20-0 again.
don't the what they're called, the neuro disruptors, the pistols that deal mortal wounds, don't those mortal wounds stack up pretty quickly when shooting? Well, maybe not necessarily Bellicor, but the Lord of Change, for example, because he doesn't have the minus to hit, etc.
Yeah, they do stack up, but he pretty much most of the wounds I mentioned were from those. He did like probably 1 wound with Meltdown Bellicor, like that, the one that passed through his save with command reroll, and so he did like 5 wounds with Melta, and then pretty much another 7 or 8 wounds were from Neuropistols, and then another 3 from Troopmaster in combat, and another 2 from unit in combat. But the problem is that all of his combat is wounding my monstrous creatures on 6s, so it's really rough. And then the Lord of Change got some wounds from Death Jester and Neuropistols and stuff like that. So in the end, it's really hard to get through those monstrous creatures with -1 to wound, because all the boats and all the combat basically wounds on 6s. So it's really rough.
Yeah, and they don't have any rerolls, any pluses to wound to help with that. At least in the shooting. So yeah, it's definitely tough. Okay, round 3.
Yeah, round 3 we got a team from Międzyrzecz, so local players that actually got some high scores in previous rounds, and they had 1,000 Suns, they had Orcs, and they had Necrons, I believe. I'm not 100% sure.
And
or Harlequins. No, the last team, the last army was Harlequins. Yeah.
okay,
So
you're not
1,000
telling me
Suns,
that this
Orcs.
was a strong team composition, though.
Well, it was
At
quite.
least on paper.
Yeah, it wasn't that great, but actually they had 1,000 Suns with some demons, and I didn't want to play that, and I ended up doing just that. So I got 1,000 Suns with demons.
Okay, so how did it go? Why didn't you, maybe first, why didn't you want that? Is it because of the amount of the weight of dice from Scarab Occult and how they pretty much save on 2-ups from Flamers?
Yeah, mostly that, because pretty much whole army can save up on 2-ups against flamers, because as long as the Space Marines, the Rubric Marines, they are, as long as they are in cover, they save on 2-up as well, because they have armor of contempt, and they have -1 against +1 against damage 1. So pretty much whole army across the board can save on 2-ups. He had 2 units of his own flamers, and he had 2 units of terminators that, like you mentioned, can both save on 2-up and then can dish out a lot of dices on with +1 to wound that can strip those monstrous creatures out of wounds quite nicely. But well, the issue here was that the player was not that experienced. let's say. And he did few mistakes. Well, basically, we both deployed pretty defensively, but he probably slightly more because he placed 2 units of flamers in, well, 1 unit of flamers, 1 big unit of flamers and 1 small unit of flamers in reserves, and placed his terminators behind some ruins in his deployment zone. And I deployed, well, across the deployment zone to screen out as much as I can. But I actually ended up going first. I pushed up toward the middle of the board while still screening with horrors in my deployment zone, and I pushed Blackor to the middle, and I pushed Lord of Change on one of the flanks to put some spells into Terminators and spawns and stuff like that. I actually killed like 2 Terminators and 1 spawn and 1 rubric. It went quite well, but the issue here was that in his turn, he decided to push back instead of waiting a bit more. And well, first of the 8 Terminators left from the squad went for the Lord of Change, but he was like, I don't know, like 16 or 17 inches from them. So with 5 inches movement, they were still far away. And he planned on using the spell to move them again, warp speed or something like that. And then he teleported the second squad out in the open to put some shots to Belakor and try to charge some Nurglings on objective, something like that. And well, first off, he forgot I have 4-up deny. Well, actually, he didn't think about it when using the Cabal points, and he just and he rolled like 11 on the spell, so he decided to not do anything with this warp speed because it's a high roll, so I probably won't deny it, and I denied it with a 4-up. So the Terminators were left there in the open. They couldn't charge me. Well, they could, but they needed like 11 to reach me. And on the other side, he teleported the Terminators, but he did like 5 wounds to Belakor or something like that, 5 or 6 wounds. Well, not very impressive, and didn't make the 9 inches charge, which is obviously a pure 50-50 roll with reroll. So it happens. And then I had 2 units of Terminators pretty much handed out to me. So I moved Belakor towards the 10-man unit that shot him and dropped blood letters next to them. So they killed 4 models each. So he was left with 1 guy because I actually killed 1 with some mortal wounds in psychic phase. And on the bottom, Lord of Change killed 2 or 3, I believe 2 with psychic phase, and I pushed 2 units of flamers there. And well, he says on 2-up, but if I throw at him like, I don't know, like 60 dices, something like that, well, after wound roll and etc., it was like 40 something. You still get some ones there. So another 2 or 3 died from shooting, and then Lord of Change charged them and killed 2 in combat because he still has 8 attacks that have damage 3, so it happens. So I basically turn 2, I killed 16 or 17 Terminators, and the game was pretty much over. I mean, we still traded some units later turns and did some. He did some psychic phase shenanigans because he still had plenty of Cabal points, and he stripped Lord of Change pretty much to like 2 wounds and killed some flamers, etc. But that didn't change the score that much. And one more thing that was funny, that the last Terminator that was surrounded with Bloodletters and Belakor, actually I couldn't fall back, so he tried to teleport himself out, and again 4-up deny worked perfectly, and he just stayed there to get cut down with Belakor. And pretty much that was it. I scored pretty much like 80 something again. and my opponent did 20 or something around that.
Oh yeah, when you lose that many Terminators, you basically don't really have much to play the table with. Not only damage output, but also trying to get missions and objectives, etc. It's really rough.
Yeah, you should have played everything into the Lord of Change while staying within very long range, like let's say 20 inches or so, and ignore Belacor in the middle and wait for all the flamers and everything else he had, and just try to mortal wounds and shooting into a lot of change, and maybe hope to kill him with that, ignoring the charge, just stripping some wounds and play defensively and look for an opening.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just split fire into those two big demons because you really need to commit to be able to kill one. Not even two. Right, so you won all the games in day one. So I guess you were going in good moods into day two. And day two started off a bit rough for you guys. I think you had quite a difficult pairing.
I thought you meant the evening before.
The evening wasn't difficult.
Well, for some it was.
Okay, that's true. That's true. For some it was. But what happens in Międzyrzecz stays in Międzyrzecz, I guess.
Yeah. I actually knew I had to drive home because I was the driver, so I didn't do anything crazy, but well, there were things happening there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really nice when you have everyone playing in the tournament staying pretty much at one place. So
Yeah, that's amazing. It reminds me of old tournaments when we used to play on some kind of gym classes at the schools where everyone was sleeping just underneath the tables in sleeping bags, and it was cool because everyone was there. You could integrate really great with everyone.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we had the chance to do here. Nevertheless, though, back to the gaming. So round 4. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so actually round 4, it was Kark, Vladi, and Kruker. So probably one of the strongest teams on the tournament. And well, we thought that it would be a hard matchup. And it actually played out during the pairing mostly. Because, well, we analyzed the missions and the tables, and we decided that we won't think about what they do. We'll just put our armies where we think they belong, and just play out what we can there. Because if we start to think, well, they will put Tau here, or because we might put Eldars there, but then they think, well, we might do this, then we will place Tau somewhere else. It won't work. So we decided even if we get unfavorable matchups, if still on the proper mission, we can get to draw. And if we are lucky, we get one favorable matchup and it's done. And it actually happens exactly like this. We placed our Necrons on the mission number 13. So the mission that is great for Necrons. We placed Duda on the table that was probably the heaviest terrain there. It was 32 mission. Well, the quarter deployment zones. So 32, I believe, and I was playing the diagonal mission with replacing the objectives before the game, well, moving the objectives before the game, and it was like medium table, but had some large walls that can hide my monstrous creatures in case I get Skark and I don't go first, so I don't get shot off the board with his railguns. And we ended up getting, I got Mirror with Vladi, Skark got Duda, so far not so good, but Gyto got Kruker with Tyrannids, and he had proper mission, proper table, And the Tyranids had mostly casters, like 2 Neurotrops, 2 units of Zoanthropes, a Harpy, so a lot of mortal wounds, but not that much to push down the board. So he could just score heavily and push Crooker out of the objectives. And I believe that's what happened. Gyto got, well, after turn 2, it was obvious he will win, and he will win high, because he also got Hive Tyrant turn 1 or turn 2 without him getting into combat even once, because he was obviously next to the Tyrant guards, but on one side he was screened with just Hormagaunts. So Gyto used both of his destroyer units to first kill Hormagaunt and then kill the Tyrant. And I believe he pushed him off the board, and it ended up 18-12. And because we knew that he's doing good, and that Duda is actually holding up to Tau because he went first, I could play defensively against demons, well, in mirror match. And actually we wanted to take a split, but the Vladis team asked him to play because they knew that they are not in favor. So, and actually it was a good decision because I played it really poorly, and Vladi definitely outplayed me. But then I outrolled him, as I do. So,
as you do.
as I do. So like his Lord of Change was casting against my Flamers and I had plenty of dispels in range. So he was rolling like 8, I was rolling 11 easily. So so his Lord of Change out of 3 spells only managed to cast 1, I believe, and well, stuff like that was happening all the time. So, but actually, Vladi pushed me off the board. I deployed a little bit too defensively, although he didn't have Be'lakor. He had pretty much similar army, but instead of Be'lakor, he had Soul Grinder and some more Screamers and some Seekers.
And the Demon Prince, I think.
And the Demon Prince of Khorne,
damage.
Yeah. So he played those Grinder and this Demon Prince quite aggressively, but, well, Prince was behind the terrain, Grinder in the middle of the board, and he went first. That was also quite important. It pushed me hard to get 3 objectives in his range, so that I will score less and he will do more from Reality Rebels, etc. And I actually had an idea to push back and play aggressively and just let's see what happens. And so I wanted to teleport Lord of Change and put my Be'lakor into his Soul Grinder and maybe try to teleport some Flamers and try to clear one of the flanks to push him back. But Duda just reminded me that, hey, we are in favor, and we are winning, so you just need to not lose high. So I said, okay, well, let's roll with it. And I let Vladi push me back more. But like I said, I outrolled him, so it didn't go as good as it could, as well as it could. So in turn 3, I still had both Be'lakor and Lord of Change and some Flamers. While Vladi had Soul Grinder, 1.5 unit of Flamers, and some scoring units. So I was ahead in units, I believe, but I was behind in the score. And we actually had very little time left on the clock, both of us, because I had like slightly less than 3 minutes and Vladi had around 7 minutes. And then it was his turn now, but he was going first, so let's say he still was ahead in time. But we already knew that we already knew the scores because Gyto already had 18 and Duda was drawing or winning. And we knew that Vladi won't do more points here, maybe 1 more, but there was also a high chance that I will push back because I had more units. So, and he had to make like 18 or 19 points to draw the whole game, the whole team game. So we decided to just count it and not risk penalties. So yeah, so it ended up 14-6 for Bloody. But I fucked up this game.
And so, what are your thoughts on the mirror matchup in general? What does it depend on mostly? Dice, or is there a better way to play it?
Well, it's definitely dice dependent because when you're rolling those flamers, well, maybe not flamers, but when you're rolling those 3-up saves or when you're rolling those spells, it really depends how high you roll, and it can really flip there. But also, it's very dependent on how you play. You need to play it aggressively, and you need to have a lot of units to trade. And Bloody had a lot more units, and because I had Belacor, which impacted the game, and I didn't push him. Well, I didn't use my Belacor aggressively enough to make him focus me. So that would probably even out the amount of units he had, because he would have to focus Belacor a bit. Otherwise, he could charge some flamers or something like that. And flamers are not good in killing those large monstrous creatures because they have low strength, so they will wound them on 6s. And yeah, so you probably need to. But it's like every mirror match. You need to focus and you need to place your units very, very carefully.
Right. Okay. And you've won that team game as well. So who were your last opponents?
So actually, at first we thought we would play Krakow, but it turned out that some scores are still not in the tourney keeper, and we ended up playing Victor and Gogi, well, the team that was slightly, like the Turbo Cola team, but it was slightly like mixed from different players. The last player was Shimon with Necrons. So Victor had Harlequins because he's mostly playing them He's been mostly playing them recently. Gogi actually picked up Tau for the sake of team composition, and Shimon was playing Necrons. So also a very strong team composition, but fortunately we had Demons, which, like I mentioned at the beginning, pair really well against Harlequins and Tau. So as long as I don't get Necrons, which is drawish with slight favor for Necrons, depending on the scenario mostly, then we are golden. And well, that's what happened. I got Tau again.
And Gogi only had Riptides with burst cannons, if I remember correctly, because I played against him on TTS before that. So I think I have a slight idea how that game went, but you can enlighten us.
Yeah, well, the thing was that it was very strange table, very specific table. There was a line of containers through the middle, like 3.5 or 4 containers wide. So, and it was hammer and harvey deployment, again 5 objectives in the middle. So no one wanted to play there. That's mainly why I got those Tau. And because there was barely any terrain in the middle, there were 2 or 3 units in each deployment zone, and this container line in the middle, and some forests around them, and that's all. So so it impacted the game and the pairing process definitely. And well, I decided to just place pretty much all my demons behind the large ruins, except the 2 big guys that were standing in the middle, just right in the open. And but here Gogi actually went first. He used his 2 planes, 2 bombers to kill 1 horror unit and kill Exalted Flamer, and then pushed some units ahead. And he actually played it so that he will maximize his scoring those first 2 or 3 turns. And because he knew that it's unfavorable matchup and he will probably lose his army up till turn 3 or 4, and wanted to maximize his scoring. And actually, turn 1, it looked like he might do just that, and it didn't look well for us as a team, because Gyto was losing badly with Harlequins, which was a surprise. We thought he will do like something around the draw, and Duda had Necrons, which was an unfavorable matchup for him. So it was like I was supposed to do like 15 up or even 17 up to so we can win, and it didn't look that well, because after Gogi did his offensive actions, I decided to push back, and I used 2 flamer units against crisis unit again, and used two big guys to kill the planes, because didn't have pretty much anything else except flamers that were already committed elsewhere against those planes and their dish mortal wounds, which hurt demons a lot. And well, while I managed to kill the planes, I didn't manage to kill any crisis, even though they had 11 models. So first unit was doing 45 shots, but I failed +1 to wound when casting spells, and I actually couldn't reroll it because I needed a reroll for the teleport. And I couldn't do it the other way around regarding which spell was first, because unfortunately the +1 to wound on flamers needs line of sight, which is a shame. So I need to start it with this. And so I was only wounding on 3s or 4s, I don't remember. I was wounding on 4s because Exalted Flamer died first
Was
turn.
dead, yeah.
Yeah. So I was wounding on 4s, but I still managed to do like 40 something wounds with 2 units. And first he tanked a lot on drones, and then Iridium the guy with Iridium and the steam pack that feel no pain took everything and got 2 wounds of him. So I thought that, well, it's not looking that great. But then turn to Gogi did grave mistake, and he decided to focus on screamers, on some scoring units, and only shot one crisis unit into the flamers, while he planned to tie them in combat. But well, I had Belacor, so he actually only managed to tie 1.5 unit, or actually even just 1, because he couldn't consolidate into the second unit. So I teleported them back. I deep strike last unit of flamers. I deep strike bloodletters, and I pretty much cleared all his scoring units. So all the crude hounds, and Belacor managed to charge the crisis unit that charged me, that charged flamers and screamers turn in the previous turn. So well, if you don't have drones, the Belacor kills the crisis unit pretty easily, because he has at least damage 4, and he has -4 AP, so they die just like that, ignoring vulnerable save. So he killed all 5 of them. Well, actually, first one died with betraying shades because they have 3 attacks each. So that's
18
15
dice.
dices. 15 dices because there were 5 guys. 16 even because there is a sergeant.
Sergeant, yeah.
Yeah, so it was 16 dices. So the guy with steam pack got 3 mortal wounds. Well, he had 2 left, so the unit got 3 mortal wounds, so he died, and then charge killed him. And the Riptides were just charged. One was charged with horrors. Well, actually, the horrors charged the crisis unit with Belacor, and then piled into Riptide. And the other Riptide was charged with Lord of Change. And it was pretty much game over, because he had like 1 commander left, and those 2 Riptides that were in combat. One of them still managed to kill to kill Fate Skimmer while hitting on 6s in combat because he was like on his last bracket. But well, it happens. But it was still like, well, I did max I could, so like 87 or something because I took war pretty well, so I couldn't max out to 90. And Tau did like 20 something or 30 points, something like that. So it was another 20 to nothing.
Well, and I think you finished first individually, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I was just 1 point ahead of Victor.
Yep, so well done, big congrats. But before I ask you about what you think of the list, etc., after the tournament, let's just do that review first, because we're going to do it real quick. I mean, the codex is pretty old, so there's no point in...
When you call the codex that is 2 months old, pretty. That's
Well, you know,
says something about the current, like rate that GW pull-ups
yeah,
release.
release rate. Yeah, I guess you're right, but you know, everyone's already done these reviews, so we're really late to the party in that regard.
Well, but at least you have some experience from tournaments, and well, for
That is
example,
true.
I've done a review with our like Team Poland podcast with Gogi and Cebu, and we actually totally misjudged Lord of Change. That we said that he has not enough output to be playable. That he's very resilient, but his output is too low to take him in the competitive list. And yet here we are. He's probably one of the best picks in the codex.
Yeah, see, so yeah, exactly. So it does it makes sense to do a little bit of playing before doing those reviews. So let's start with the warp storm effects. Without going into too much detail, what do you think of that mechanic?
Well, this is a mechanic that is like really well. It's not 100% used. I mean, you could do so much more with it. Like the way that you only generate the points with a random roll is really not enough. You'd really miss an opportunity to get those points during the game. That could be such an amazing mechanic. And now you're really just left with your roll, and then you can get 2 dices from previous turn, and that's pretty much all. And there are a
Yeah,
lot
but
of
to get
effects.
those 2 dice, you have to not spend something, and
Yeah,
that's quite hard.
so that's still up to the roll. If you roll like 7 dice first turn, you are golden and you are good to go through the whole game. But like you roll a single dice and then you are screwed.
Well, if you roll 1, then the only thing you can do is carry it over.
Yeah, actually I did it with Vladi first turn. That also impacted my decision to play defensively.
Hmm. But are there any effects worth mentioning? I mean, obviously, returning units is great. Okay, let's go back. Let me rephrase that. In your opinion, are any of the god-specific effects worth taking a separate attachment?
Yeah, definitely. There is one single effect that you use pretty much every turn, and it's called Sorcerer's Winds because it gives you +1 to cast, which you desperately miss throughout the codex. You miss like casting on 3d6 or some bonuses to cast because you have so many amazing spells and you basically only have this Singe effect and Lord of Change and Fate Skimmer and Great Unclean One, and that's pretty much all you can get to cast better than roll it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the Slanesh spells are really great, but you're not getting them off. For
Yeah, but
example,
you need a 7 or 8 to
yeah,
cast them, and
exactly.
good luck with this.
Yeah, so I think everyone has that separate Zinj detachment just for that +1 to cast, and I think that's like the only effect I used throughout that tournament as well. Maybe I did revive once, I think,
Well,
because
I
I rolled
used
5.
I believe I used -1 leadership once or twice,
That
which
is a nice one.
sometimes that's a nice one, and it helps if you deep strike something.
Hmm.
And actually, I tried using Insidious Whispers, the one that gives you parries on doubles against Lord of Change with Bloody, but it turned out I was just outside of range because when measuring in 3D, the flamers went on the top level of the ruin, and the Lord of Change was obviously on the floor, and I was like just less
out.
than quarter of the inch short for it, because it's actually quite a nice effect when you're casting 3 powers, and pairing actually makes a difference.
Yeah, it's all right. It's a very gimmicky one, not one
Yeah.
you use every day, obviously, but yeah, I guess that's nice to have.
And if you have some forest on the table, you can also use the ignore
Modifiers.
penalties to movement and charges or charges. And I actually didn't use it on Terracup because I didn't have that many forests in my tables, but I used it in some previous games. So if you sometimes use it as well. But that's pretty much all that is worth mentioning.
Okay, good, because I was getting worried we were saying it's not great and then getting excited about all these effects. So yeah, let's move on to keep the rhetoric going.
Well,
So
you could use some different effects if you had some more warpstone points, but if you are limited to 3 or 4 usually, then it's hard to choose anything else than +1 to cast.
that's so true. So first up, we've got the Corn part of the book, and the way the book is sorted, you actually get everything. So exalted abilities, stratagems, and data sheets from each specific god. So to sum it up, what do you think is interesting in Corn that holds out on the competitive scene?
Yeah, well, Corn is obviously melee oriented very heavily, as it always is. And well, there are a few honorable mentions here, I guess. There is a Bloodthirster that can, well, with his exalted trait, Indomitable Onslaught, he can only suffer 8 wounds each phase. So with 20 wounds on board, it makes him semi-durable, let's say. Well, depends against what army you're playing. If it's like army that can only do damage in 1 or 2 phases, then he is quite nice, and he can be a problematic choice, problematic unit for opponent. But the problem with him is that he's very roll dependent. I mean, he doesn't have any rerolls. He can get a reroll to hit from Balakor, but other than that, he's just hitting on 2s as long as he's on this top profile, because he get them when he's damaged. He gets up to 4
Yeah,
weapon
his
skill.
weapon skill degrades, as
Yeah,
do numbers of attacks.
which is very unfortunate. And if he gets any like transhuman, he wants on force, even though he has like strength 16, which means that he might not kill what you want to kill him with him. But as long as you are charged, like, I don't know, like Rhino or something like that, he just mops it off the board. So yeah, he could probably, like few codices earlier, he would be a top choice. But now with all the transhuman and all the penalties to hit, although you can bypass them with relic, which is also nice to mention. But well, he is not that great, but he's worth considering, as well as his card brand, because he is even more killy. He ignores invulnerable saves. But then again, he's even slower than Bloodthirster, and well, basically has to be deep strike because he doesn't have fly.
And only
And
moves 8 inches.
Yeah, and only move any inches. And he also, well, as long as you're playing a shooty army, he will probably do fine because you actually can lock your opponent in combat with him. Because if you want a fullback, you need to roll 3d6, and if you 3 or 2d6,
3d6, and if
yeah,
you roll higher than the leadership, that unit cannot fall back.
Yeah, so against shooty army, it's pretty cool. You can do some shenanigans like charge one unit, then pile unit to the other one, and hope that he will, well, that your opponent won't roll low enough and that he will stay in combat with you or something like that. But then again, well, if you play a melee heavy army, this doesn't matter as much, and the disadvantage of that Skarbrand is that he buffs both your army and your opponent's army with +1 attack, which can be really problematic if you face, like, I don't know, Blood Angels or Drukari or something like that, because that will bite you in the ass.
Yeah.
But other than that,
He also makes playing one of the secondaries more difficult because he makes morale tests automatically passed for your opponent.
Yeah, but pretty much that secondary only works when you kill stuff and you roll above their leadership, because so little models flee the battlefield these days that, yeah, you don't get that many points from it.
What do you think about Blood Crushers? Because I think when the book released, they were quite a popular choice in lists. At least I've seen them in few lists on the internet. What's your take?
Well, they are cool. They have great models, but their problems are, well, first off, they are not very mobile because they are cavalry and they have quite big bases. So it's hard to move around the ruins with them. So you usually are restricted to deep striking them. And even if you deep strike them, it's not always that easy to get everyone into combat. And even if you do, they still lack some punch. I mean, they are either too expensive or have too little attacks to be that good. And well, they don't have any utility. So every any only reason to take them is to kill stuff, and they don't kill it fast enough, I believe. Although you can make a case that they have some survivability because they have 4-up demonic save in both melee and shooting. So with 4 wounds they can survive some punishment. But again, it's still only 4-up, so not that much. Well, I mean, they are probably playable, but to be very competitive, they would need to shave off like 5 or 10 points of their point cost.
Okay. So moving on, we've got the Zinch part of the book. So we've obviously mentioned the Lord of Change, so let's not go into that. And Flamers, obviously. And
Yeah,
Pink
well,
Horrors, obviously.
some people say it's Codex Flamers.
Yes, yeah. It does really feel that Zinch is like the most solid part of the book, at least now.
Yeah, well, partly because I believe it's partly because there is a lot of shooting in current meta, and a lot of mobile shooting, especially. And well, if you have a 3-up demonic or invulnerable or whatever you call it, save across the board, then well, you are good to go against shooting army.
Yeah, and yeah, it makes almost all the unit choices. Almost every unit in that part actually has some role to play. Even like small units of Screamers are okay. Burning Chariot you might consider, but okay, I do actually have a question. What do you think about the Fate Skimmer? Is he worth it for that +1 to cast over a regular Herald Change caster?
That's a hard question, and I would just, I guess, spin the wheel here. Because I honestly cannot answer it. I mean, At first, I thought that it's totally not worth it, and it's better to play just a standard change caster because it's, I don't know, like 70 or 80 points less, which means like another unit of
Or another
small
change
demons
caster for
or
more
another change
casts.
caster. But then again, if pretty much every spell is 7 up to cast, then this +1 makes quite a difference. And if you have +2, because you use Cinch bonus from the table, works on table, then it's 5 up and it's pretty much
It's
warranted
doable
cast.
at that
Well,
point.
if you have a reroll, it's a close to like, it's above 90% with reroll from command point. So it's really high chance to get the spell off. But then again, if you have Lord of Change with, if his last spell is Infernal Flames as a backup, then you can spend command points to cast it from Lord of Change because you have a stratagem that lets you cast additional power. So then you have Lord of Change has +2 to cast. So then again, you get back to Fate Skimmer and think, well, it's not worth it. But then you think if you have enough command points for these tricks, usually you do, but sometimes you don't. And you go back and forth, and I actually can decide. But he has a proper chassis because he has a toughness 6 and 9 wounds, and he has a 5 up and 3 up save, so he can survive some stuff, and well, he can kill some trash in close combat because he has 6 attacks with a Screamer's profile, so it's also like, considerable. Well, it's
You
hard
can
to say,
even give
but
him +1 to wound, I think, if you're desperate.
yeah,
Yeah, you can.
but I honestly cannot decide if I want to drop him for change caster or not.
I think I'm in the same spot. Usually when I have one, I wish I had the other. So if I take the Fate Skimmer, I feel like this guy isn't worth the extra 70 points. But then when I take the Change Caster, oh, where's my +1 to spells?
Yeah, I
It's
mean, like,
it's a pickle.
after this tournament, I think that I might drop him and one Screamer to get one unit of Seekers of Slaanesh or something similar for more board presence. But then I know that, well, I will cast first Gay's Infernal Flames on him, and I will roll a 6 and I will cry internally.
Yeah, and again, I had the Change Caster during the tournament, and I'm thinking about fitting in Fate Skimmer now. So yeah, it's back and forth with those guys.
And also, if you have Change Caster, you still need to consider having a command point to teleport him to give the roll 1 to wounds on Flamers, which is quite important often. So
yeah,
that's
and
that. And Fate Skimmer has 14 inches movement, which with advance is usually enough to be anywhere on the board. So that's also important.
and a much bigger base, which helps with getting the auras of Nurgle up next. I think that one is a real. It's a bit of a bummer because the units seem okay, but they need like 3 or 4 buffers and they don't kill anything.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with all of the parts of the codex except Singe, that you have pretty solid datasheets, but you lack some mechanics to make them work together. Or if you have those kind of rules, they require you to buy like 2 or 3 different heralds or greater demon or something like that, and the points quickly add up, especially if you consider that the units themselves are really expensive, like Plague Bearers being 150 points for 10 guys. It's like,
They're terrible.
Yeah, terrible.
It's just terrible.
And I mean, the Nurgle, if it got like cut down 15, maybe 20% across the board, it would be really, it could be really competitive. But in the current state, it's hard to advocate for any of those units. except obviously Nurglings, but that's because of their utility with forward deploy. I was considering for some time the guy that can take down OPSEC from a unit, but it's only 12 inches, and well, the range is, I believe, not enough with 5 inches movement to be competitive. But there's one other unit, there are Beasts of Nurgle, which can screw your opponent's day if you roll above average, or if you take them in Army of Renown, because the Balakor has some tricks to shave off wounds with stratagems. And well, I actually played a list like this on TTS, and it was a lot of fun. And they can dish out mortal wounds like crazy. 3 Beasts of Nurgle can easily kill a knight with just mortal wounds. So they are well, you can consider them taking them in the list, but they are so slow. They have 6 inches movement and nothing to boost them except obviously deep strike, but that's all. And if you need to go through all the board and they do nothing outside of the combat, so well.
Yeah, but if you deep strike them, you can't give them rerolls from Belacor, and that they really need that for the mortal wound output. I really wanted to make Plague Drones work when the Codex came out, because I think they were quite resilient. You can give them OPSEC, which is great, but they just don't kill anything.
That was always their problem. The main problem of
them...
Nurgle was always that they had weapons skill 4 up, and well, not that many attacks. So you either need really, if you have little attacks, they need to be really strong, or you need to have a lot of attacks to make up the numbers, and they have none of those.
Yeah, they have neither, and they need like 3 heralds, 1 for OPSEC, 1 for +1 to hit, the other to cast +1 to damage or something. It's
like tough. I said, the buffers quickly add up, and you have a unit that costs not 150 or whatever points, but 250, and it doesn't work.
Very unfortunate. Slaanesh, what do you think about Slaanesh? Great spells, but tough to pull off.
Yeah. They have some cool units because they have they have a lot of attacks. They are not that strong, but well, they make up those with numbers, and they are very fast, which both Nurgle and Korn can say about their units, and they can pull up some punches, but their problem is they are very squishy. Most units are toughness 3 or toughness 4, not that many wounds, and when you start focusing them, they just die so quickly, like done. And also they don't have any units with fly, so, and considering they have chariots, cavalry, and so on, and monstrous creatures, then they really need to consider terrain on the board. So, well, some units are playable, and you actually can and probably should include them in your list, but mono Slaanesh or list that focuses on Slaanesh units probably won't work in competitive meta.
Okay, I've got 2 units I want to ask you about, and that's Fiends and Seekers.
Yeah, and they are both pretty playable. I mean, Vlad uses Seekers, so that speaks for itself. They have plenty of attacks. They have +1 to charge, which, if you combine it with deep striking within leadership or within Warp Locus, makes the charge quite doable. Or you can just play them on the table with 16 inches movements. But it obviously depends on their terrain, because, like mentioned, they are cavalry. Yeah, so they need to go around terrain. But with 16 inches movement and +1 to charge, it's sometimes enough. But well, you can always deep strike them. They have plenty of attacks, and because they are those middle-sized demons, they have icon and musician and whatever. But the icon gives a great stratagem that lets you reroll all the hit rolls, so you can just use them without any buffers, which is important because the problem, one of the problems with the deck, with the codex itself, is that they clearly designed it. They designed a lot of units to work with buffers, but then the buffers were like slightly overpriced, and the buffs were not so sure to cast, or you need to be in command phase to cast them, which doesn't work with deep striking army, obviously. And you just lack the synergy of those mechanics to make them work properly. And then when you use those datasheets without those buffs, they are not good enough.
Yeah, and also the spells that go off on really high warp charge values. Like if you put Hysterical Frenzy on anything in Slanesh, that's just rinsing through weight of dice through a lot of targets, but you can't reliably get it off, and it's a problem.
And going back to Fiends, because you asked about them as well, they are cool. They are beasts with 14 inches movement, so you can play them on the board and go through terrain and just charge and something on the objective. And I actually considered like 2 units of 3, and then adding a chariot of Slanesh that can give them +1 to hit, because they can start on the table, so they are there in the command phase. And you can also include Feel No Pain, which is one of the spells that goes off on a 6, which is also doable. And you could probably use them as like that's this kind of unit that can just push through the ruins on the objective, kill like some small unit, I don't know, like 5-man unit of Vrax or something like that. Because with +1 to hit, they hit on 2s, wound on 3s, most of the things, and have some attacks, including the Malefic one, which is actually quite nice. That now it bypasses armor of a contempt and
damage reduction,
-1 damage and some stuff like that.
AP3 free damage is pretty cool with that.
So if you put some buffs on them, like Feel No Pain, +1 to hit, you can push them on the objective, and actually opponent might have some problems getting them off the objective, and their point cost is manageable because they're like 35 points each, I believe.
35.
Yeah, so 105 points for those 3 guys with Feel No Pain from spell. It's definitely you can definitely consider them, but their main problem is that they're elites. And if you play 2 patrols, you use up all the elites for flamers and exalted flamer. So you would have to play Vanguard, and then you could probably place some Fiends and maybe Beast. But then again, there is a problem with points. If you drop Be'lakor, then if I drop Be'lakor, which I'm considering as well, I would definitely consider some Fiends and a Chariot and maybe some Seekers in his place.
Okay. And last but not least, we've got the Undivided section, which has Be'lakor, pretty good spells. The Demon Prince and Soul Grinder, also quite solid data sheets. And the Army of Renown. So maybe let's talk about the Army of Renown. It looks like it's been reprinted without much editing, because you still have the stratagem that makes you automatically pass morale with a roll of a 1, which doesn't actually do anything anymore. But you've tried playing the Army of Renown when we were talking about beasts. So what do you think about it?
Well, first off, whole section of Undivided feels like it was like in the late preprint version of the codex, like they needed to add it up because they like noticed that, hey guys, we don't have anything for Undivided. And it feels like it lacks like whole section of stratagems that would work on every demo. without getting Army of Renown, like additional warlord trait, for example. That would be cool.
Definitely.
And some, I don't know, like some additional effects with leadership or these demonic saves, whatever you think about that. There were a lot of stratagems that were undivided in previous books, and they are missing now. And instead we got reprint of Belacor rules, which, like you mentioned, are not even that well designed. I mean, they were not designed at all. They just reprinted most of the rules from the previous expansion. But, well, there are some cool stratagems here, and especially the one that lets you ignore damage for 2 command points. It's really solid if you play it on either Belacor or Beast of Nurgle. Well, on Belacor it's obvious. It's like you pay 1 command points more than reroll, but you are sure the result. And then Beast, it can really screw up someone's plan if they are like, if they place some models to shoot your beasts and they counted up how many shots they need. And if you like use 1 command point for reroll, then use this gun to drop some damage, and you end up with beast that's left on one wound.
And it
then
regenerates.
it regenerates and you are done. And then there is one more trick we actually discovered. There is a stratagem that lets you either regain wounds for models that flee the battlefield, or lets you get one unit, one model up with 1 wound left. So the Beasts of Nurgle automatically regenerate up to full wounds at the end of the charge phase or whatever. And then you use this stratagem on them. And if a single model flees, then you get 1 beast with 1 wound left up and running. And then at the end of the moral phase, he's again with full wounds. So you can basically resurrect beasts for 1 command point. But you need to, 1 model needs to flee within 6 inches of them.
Yeah, but with the leadership shenanigans and then an additional, because demons natively give a -1, Belacor gives another -1, and you can spend 2 warp storm points or 3 it was to give another -1. It can happen, so that's a nice little combo.
Yeah, and in Belacor list, well, in this Army of Renown, Belacor can give his rerolls to his warlord trade rerolls to any unit except vehicle. So you don't need core. So it works on beast as well. So you can have on every 6 to hit, you get 2 mortal wounds. So basically, you just roll everything that's not a 6, and you, on average, get 12 mortal wounds from 3 beasts. At least 12, that's 12 and something.
And that's a solid output.
Yeah, you basically go into the night and you say goodbye. But the list is very restrictive because there are all of the restrictions that were left, that were in the previous edition, previous expansion are left there, and you get no benefits whatsoever as long as you play the Sorrow Demons, because you used to get the Locus that gave you -1 to hit and no rerolls, and now that's gone, completely gone, and you get nothing in return. So you basically get only benefits for getting other codexes in your list, like Knights or Chaos Space Marines. So it's a shame.
So that locus would be great to have. And you can't easily bypass the unit restrictions because Furies were removed, which were a cheap choice.
Yeah, all the demons went up in points significantly. So you basically cannot get more than 3 units of each of the gods in the list. Well, you can get 4, but you need to really use cheap models. So it's really
not
restrictive.
optimal. Yeah.
You can take like a Herald of Tsinj and 2 Flamer units and 2 Beasts of Nurgle units and then some troops and some Slaanesh to fill up, and you are done.
And that's it. Okay, we've covered the book more or less. We've been playing it for the past 2 months. So what's your take on the faction in general? Does it fit in the meta? And yeah, what would you change to your list from Pyrrha?
Oh man, does it fit in the meta? It fits in the meta perfectly. Like I mentioned, it pairs really well with Tau, it pairs really well with Harlequins, because not only they cannot do much against those greater demons, they also suffer greatly from Flamers and Mortal Wounds. And those are 2 probably most popular choices in competitive meta in Poland right now. The third one is Necrons, which you can still play with. They are probably slightly behind, but not so much. And well, every other book is, well, you are probably behind if you play against melee heavy armies, and especially if they go first, they can mop you off the board if they get to you, like Blood Angels. I haven't played it, but I believe that on some kind of hammer and anvil or something similar, if they go first, you have like 1 turn to shoot them, and they will have 2 up save in cover with Armor of Contempt on Sanguinary Guards. So you won't kill that many. And then they just get into your, get in combat with you, and they will just trash you. So I guess that's probably bad. But again, there are not so many armies like that in meta at the moment. So I believe even though demons have some bad pairings, they are not very popular right now, and they can easily play with most popular builds right now. Well, the only army that is not really great for demons are Tyrannids from the top tier armies. But still, if you roll hot, you can win it. Like yesterday, I played with Crooker. I played it badly. It was my first game against Tyrannid. And then I rolled really hot in turn 2 and 3 and just did 19-1. Just like that, because demons are really roll dependent. Because, well, if you have a save that you cannot bypass in any way, as long as you pass it, you're golden.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does work that way. Yeah, also, but having the transhuman removed from like units like warriors and zoanthropes really improves that pairing until people figure out new Tyranid builds, at least.
Yeah, and also it's important to mention that Codex is actually quite fun. I had a lot of fun playing it, especially after playing so many games with knights that are so one-dimensional. And here you have quite some tricks. You can teleport, you can move around, you can use some mortals to snipe some units. And your opponents need to be really on, well, he has to really focus to not leave you some openings, because you have a lot of tools to like use this. Like my first game against Tau, I managed to kill Tau Commander 10-1 because Eman slightly misplaced his commander. It was really slight, but he was only unit that was closer to my units were crude unit, the 10-man crude unit, but they were slightly behind the containers, and the containers are tall enough to block line of sight to Croods, but not tall enough to block line of sight to Commander from Lord of Change, and I just sniped him with Mortal Wounds. And you have high enough output to like take advantage of those mistakes, which really gives you a lot of place on the table.
Yeah, I also think the codex is quite fun. This building is quite interesting too, because a lot of units are really on the verge of being playable. I mean, after you take your Flamers and your Lord of Change, there really is quite a lot of room as to what to pick. I mean, nothing's obvious, obviously
You can
better
always spin the
than
wheel.
anything else. Yeah, exactly. You can always spin the wheel. Although I more often than I would like to end up with like having 10 points that you can't do anything with, and that part is really annoying.
Yeah, that is annoying, and I'm afraid that this is the direction that the game is going to. That I mean, they first introduced power levels, which didn't sit well with community. So the points remained for match play, and now I believe we can see that they are, with every new release, they are using points for less and less options. So like now demons have everything included in the basic cost, like icons, musicians, whatever you can choose there. Pretty much everything except additional. Even most units cannot have additional models. They are just 10 unit strength, and that's all. And it's the same with a lot of, let's say, buffs that other codices got. Like, I don't know, Plague Marines getting everything for free, and similar choices in other books. And I think that's something that the direction that GW is taking right now, and I'm not sure I like it, and because it really limits the list building.
Yeah, that's true. But well, we'll just have to wait and see how it pans out. Lesiu.
Let's hope it's not a future for 10th edition.
Yes, yes. And on that note, I thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to have you on and talk about the tournament and the Chaos Daemons book.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a fun talk.
And to all our listeners, again, if you like our content, please make sure to like the vids we put out, subscribe, hit the bell button on YouTube or whatever else you have, depending on the streaming media you use. And we promise to be back with more content now more regularly. So we should have some stuff from the LGT still, and definitely a Votan review is coming up as well. So stay tuned in for that one. For today, that was Chaos Demons and Pick Up with Lesiu. I was Joker. We thank you very much, and until next time, bye bye.
Bye bye.